The Great Trouble. Author's Note: A Reader's Guide to the Great Trouble. Many readers ask where I get my ideas. My inspiration often comes from what I read, and that's certainly true for The Great Trouble. Several years ago, I came upon a book by Stephen Johnson called The Ghost Map: The Story of London's Most Terrifying Epidemic, and How It Changed Science, Cities, and the Modern World. There's a picture, and the caption says, "Replica of the Broad Street pump outside the John Snow, a pub on what is now Broadwick Street, London." Photographed by Deborah Hopkinson. Nice. The Ghost Map tells the true story of Dr. John Snow and the Broad Street cholera epidemic of 1854. While The Great Trouble is historical fiction, the story mirrors the progress of the epidemic during those late summer days so long ago, when 616 residents died. Some of the action is compressed into fewer days. See the timeline for a summary of actual events. And I've given my fictional characters Eel and Flory major roles in solving the mystery. The real Dr. Snow created the now famous map that revealed that deaths from cholera, sometimes called the Blue Death, were clustered around the Broad Street pump. By interviewing residents, including the sons of Susanna Ely, who died in her home several miles away after drinking the water, Dr. Snow was able to demonstrate a link between drinking from the Broad Street well and getting the disease. Thanks to Dr. Snow's testimony at the committee meeting on September 7th, the pump handle was removed on September 8th. In his book, Stephen Johnson calls that day, quote, "a turning point," unquote, an important moment in the history of public health when action was taken to protect citizens based on scientific theory. The investigations didn't stop then. Later that fall, Dr. Snow and Reverend Henry Whitehead were asked to join the St. James Cholera Inquiry Committee to continue to study the epidemic. Reverend Whitehead, who had no medical training, disagreed with Dr. Snow's theory at first, but as he talked to families, he became convinced that Dr. Snow was right. It was also Henry Whitehead who discovered that baby Frances, Fanny, Lewis, was the index case that started the epidemic. This led to an excavation of the cesspool at 40 Broad Street in the spring of 1855. In his report of May 1st, the surveyor, Jehoshaphat York, noted that the bricks lining the cesspool were decayed. The Broad Street well was less than 3 feet away, and the surrounding soil was saturated with human waste. In other words, when Sarah Lewis emptied her baby's diapers into the cesspool, the cholera bacteria seeped through bricks and soil to contaminate the water in the well. As in our story, after little Frances Lewis died on Saturday, September 2nd, the epidemic naturally waned because no new contamination of the well was taking place. But her father, Constable Thomas Lewis, fell ill on Friday, September 8th, the very day the pump handle was removed. Had the well not been closed, the epidemic would undoubtedly have killed more people because Mrs. Lewis had begun emptying her husband's waste into the cesspool. When no new epidemics struck the neighborhood, the pump handle was eventually restored in September 1855. Dr. John Snow is known today as a pioneer both in public health and in the map of anesthesiology. But until I read the Ghost Map, I hadn't heard of him. My journey to find out more took me to books, websites, museums, and libraries, including the Wellcome Library in London, which specializes in the history of medicine. Finally, I found myself standing on Broadwick Street, which used to be called Broad Street. There's a replica of the pump there, and a pink slab of granite nearby marks where it once stood. In 2011, as it must have been in 1854, the street was the center of a bustling neighborhood. I couldn't help reaching down to touch the stone as I imagined what it had been like to live then. And that is how this book came to be. About the characters. The Great Trouble includes both fictional characters and historical figures. Eel, Henry, Flory, Fisheye Bill Tyler, the Griggs family, Abel Cooper, Nasty Ned, and Thumbless Jake are fictional. Historical figures include Dr. John Snow, Reverend Henry Whitehead, William Farr, and Dr. Snow's housekeeper, Jane Weatherburn. I have also used the names of some actual Soho residents. The brothers John and Edward Huggins really were the owners of the Lion Brewery, though I have no reason to think they were not both perfectly nice gentlemen. Their nephew, Hugsy, is fictional. People who lived at 40 Broad Street include a tailor, Mr. G, who became the fictional Mr. Griggs. Constable Thomas Lewis and his wife Sarah also lived at that address, along with a son, an infant daughter named Frances, and a daughter named Annie, who in a later census was listed as an embroiderer. Thus, she became Annie Ribbons in my book. Susanna Ely, who lived in Hampstead, was the widow of a munitions factory owner. Knowing of her fondness for water from the Broad Street well, her sons had a bottle delivered to her daily. Additional information about major historical figures in the story is included in the following sections. Dr. John Snow, 1813 to 1858. Oh, he was only 45 when he died. John Snow was born in York, the eldest of 9 children. His father, William, began as an unskilled laborer and was eventually able to purchase a farm. John's parents wanted to give their children a primary education, so John went to school until the age of 14. In 1827, he was apprenticed to William Hardcastle, a family friend who was a surgeon apothecary in Newcastle upon Tyne, a coal mining town. It was there, in 1831, that John first became acquainted with cholera. He moved to London to continue his medical training in 1836 and set up his practice in the city 2 years later. In 1846, the London dentist James Robinson became the first doctor in England to demonstrate ether. Gases like ether and chloroform were important because they allowed people to undergo surgical and dental procedures without pain. John Snow began doing his own research on anesthesia and often experimented on guinea pigs, mice, frogs, and other animal subjects. He also designed an inhaler and began assisting dentists and surgeons. He became so well known for his skill that he gave chloroform to Queen Victoria when she gave birth to Prince Leopold in 1853. At the same time, Dr. Snow was researching cholera. In 1854, when the Broad Street epidemic occurred, he was studying the relationship between cholera outbreaks and London's water supply. Even after the success of the Broad Street investigation in 1854, not everyone in the field of public health agreed with Dr. Snow's theory on cholera. It was not until 1866, partly thanks to Henry Whitehead, that Dr. Snow's conviction that cholera was a waterborne disease was fully accepted. Unfortunately, John Snow was not there to see that development. He suffered what was apparently a stroke and died on June 18, 1858. He was only 45. Today he is remembered for his pioneering research in anesthesia and epidemiology. Reverend Henry Whitehead, 1825 to 1896. Henry Whitehead is an unlikely hero in the history of cholera. He had no medical or public health training. He was born in Ramsgate, where his father was the headmaster of a school. Whitehead attended the University of Oxford, receiving his degree in 1850. His first assignment in London was an assistant curate at St. Luke's Church on Berwick Street. Just shy of 30 when the cholera epidemic broke out, he was a familiar and comforting figure to the families of the neighborhood. Reverend Whitehead remained unconvinced by Dr. John Snow's theory until the two of them were thrown together on the St. James Cholera Inquiry Committee. In January 1855, after reading the monograph about the Broad Street epidemic that Dr. Snow had prepared and gathering information from the residents, Reverend Whitehead came to believe that Dr. Snow was right. In 1865 and 1866, when cholera again broke out, Reverend Whitehead published articles reminding the public of Dr. Snow's earlier work. In 1874, when he left London for a position in Brampton, a farewell dinner was held in his honor. During his speech, he called his own old friend, quote, "as great a benefactor in my opinion to the human race as has appeared in the present century," unquote. Dr. William Farr, 1807 to 1883. William Farr was born into a large family in the village of Shropshire. It was his good fortune to attract the attention of a local benefactor, Joseph Price, who paid for his education. When Price died in 1828, he left William money, which the young man used to pursue medical training. William became interested in medical statistics, urging that physicians record the exact reason for a person's death. In 1838, he joined the General Register Office for England and Wales, where he was responsible for the collection of medical statistics. He stayed with the office until his retirement in 1880. Dr. Farr came late to believing that contaminated water, not miasma, caused the spread of cholera. It was not until the cholera epidemic of 1866, 8 years after Dr. John Snow's death, that he fully supported Dr. Snow's theory. Today, Dr. Farr is remembered for developing a national vital statistics system, which provided data to public health officials and served as an example to other countries. The setting. The Great Trouble takes place in Victorian London. Queen Victoria ruled Great Britain from 1837 until her death in 1901. To date, hers is the longest reign of any British monarch and the longest of any female monarch in history. This period has become known as the Victorian era. In the summer of 1854, when our story opens, London was a rapidly growing city of 2 million. Scavengers were the recyclers of Eel's London. Night soil men emptied cesspools, mudlarks and other river finders recycled wood, coal, and other things from the Thames. There were rag pickers and bone collectors. Pure finders collected dog waste and sold it to tanners, who used it in making leather goods. But the scavengers could not keep up. London was a city without a sewer system capable of dealing with its animal and human waste. Much of it ended up in the Thames, especially as indoor toilets, which led to the river, became more prevalent. London would have to wait until the Great Stink of 1858, a summer when the stench became so bad that laws were finally passed to authorize the construction of a modern sewer system. It took 16 years and 318 million bricks to build 83 miles of sewers guided by the vision of the chief metropolitan engineer, Joseph Bazalgette. But that is another story. Cholera, yesterday and today. Cholera is caused by the bacterium Vibrio cholerae. Although Robert Koch is usually credited with being the first to see the bacillus under a microscope in 1883, an Italian researcher named Filippo Pacini identified it in 1854, the same year as the Broad Street epidemic. In 1965, the name Vibrio cholera Pacini, 1854, was adopted in honor of Pacini's earlier, largely forgotten discovery. As Dr. Snow theorized, cholera is spread primarily through contaminated water. According to the website of International Medical Corps, cholera is an acute diarrheal disease caused by an infection in the intestines that can kill even a healthy adult in a matter of hours. Symptoms, including severe watery diarrhea, can surface in as little as 2 hours or up to 5 days after infection, and can then trigger extreme dehydration and kidney failure. With such a short incubation period, cholera can easily explode into an outbreak. Cholera is caused by ingestion of the bacterium, Vibrio cholerae. The infection is spread through contaminated fecal matter, which can be consumed through tainted food and water sources, or because of poor sanitation and hygiene, like unwashed hands.